Imagine a person who can lift cars with one hand. They can run faster than the speed of sound. They can fly across cities or bend reality itself. Now imagine that person every day choosing to help others. That simple idea is the foundation of a superhero. Superheroes are everywhere in modern culture. Movies, comics, TV shows, games, and novels. They dominate the global box office and they shape the imagination of entire generations. But superheroes, they aren't just for entertainment. They're the latest version in a much older human tradition. The idea of the superhero is actually a story about us. It's how humans understand power, morality, fear, hope, and the possibility of becoming something greater than ourselves. So today we're going to be exploring why humans create superheroes, how heroic stories have evolved throughout history, what truly makes someone a hero, and why heroes almost always seem to create villains to oppose them. Because the truth is, the supers, they may wear capes, but the idea behind them is thousands of years old. Long before comic books, humans told stories about extraordinary people. In ancient Greece, there was Heracles, a hero with immense strength who performed impossible labors. In Mesopotamia, one of the oldest written stories in history is the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was a king who was 2/3 divine, and he went on epic adventures. In India's traditions, figures like Hanuman could leap across oceans and lift mountains. These characters weren't called superheroes, but they all shared something very important. They had abilities that went beyond ordinary humans. So why did people create these figures and look up to them? Because humans have always lived in a world that feels overwhelming. Nature's powerful, life is uncertain, illness, war, and disaster, it's shaped human history for thousands and thousands of years. In that kind of world, the idea of someone who's powerful enough to fight chaos and win becomes deeply appealing. Heroes represent the possibility that someone can stand up to forces that are larger than themselves. But there is something else that I find interesting. The ancient heroes, they weren't always purely good. Heracles had a terrible temper. Gilgamesh, he began his story as a tyrant, and Hanuman, he was really mischievous as a child. Early heroes were immensely powerful, but they were flawed, and they reflected the complexity of human nature. And the modern superhero would evolve from these ancient archetypes. The superhero, as we recognize it today, really began in the early 20th century. In 1938, a character appeared in a comic book who would redefine the genre forever: Superman. Created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, Superman was something completely new. He had incredible strength, he could leap over buildings in a single bound, and he fought injustice. But the most important thing, it wasn't his powers, it was his morality. Superman represented a very specific fantasy, a powerful being who chose to protect the weak rather than dominate over them. And this idea resonated deeply during the late 1930s and 1940s, a time that was marked with economic depression and World War. And soon after, other heroes followed. Batman appeared in 1939, and Wonder Woman would appear in 1941. These characters further expanded the idea of what a superhero could be in different ways. Batman had no superpowers at all, just his intelligence, his wealth, and his relentless determination. And Wonder Woman represented a vision of strength, justice, female empowerment, and compassion that was rooted in mythological inspiration. By the mid-20th century, superheroes had become a complete cultural phenomenon, but the idea, it kept evolving. In the 1960s, writers like Stan Lee and artists like Jack Kirby, they changed the formula again. Characters like Spider-Man had real-world problems. Peter Parker, he worried about rent, school, relationships, and his responsibilities. Suddenly, heroes, they felt more human than ever, and that change really mattered. Because the most powerful superhero stories are very rarely about the powers themselves. The best stories, they're about the choices that the people make when they have those immense powers. So what actually makes someone a superhero? If we strip away the costumes, the powers, and the funny nicknames, what actually defines a hero? We know that strength alone doesn't make someone heroic. History is full of powerful people who have used their strength to do only harm. No, a hero, they're defined by something else. It's how they use their power. In many superhero stories, their powers come with a moral test, and Uncle Ben, he said it perfectly. With great power comes great responsibility. What that phrase really means is, power creates moral obligation. If someone has the ability to help others, should they? Should they risk their own safety, their happiness, and their normal life? Some of the greatest superhero stories often revolve around this tension, because the truth is that heroism, it usually requires some level of sacrifice. Batman, he sacrifices his personal life. Spider-Man, he sacrifices his interpersonal relationships. And many heroes, they give up anonymity, safety, or their peace. And that sacrifice itself is what makes them heroic. Not their powers, but their choices. One strange pattern in the comics is that the heroes almost always seem to generate villains to match them. Where there is a hero, there's usually an equal and opposite antagonist. Batman has the Joker, Superman has Lex Luthor, and Spider-Man, he has the Green Goblin. But why does this happen? Well, it's partly because the story needs some level of conflict, but there is a deeper psychological reason. The villains often represent an altered version of the hero's own traits. The Joker reflects chaos in contrast with Batman's obsession with order. Lex Luthor shows the peak of human ambition competing with Superman's alien powers. And the Green Goblin uses his abilities to cause fear, where Spider-Man, he brings security. In many ways, the villains actually ask the same question as the heroes. What should someone do with their power? But the villains, they answer completely differently. Instead of responsibility, they choose dominion. Instead of protection, they choose control. And it's simply because they can. This is when the hero and the villain, they become a duality. Two possible paths on the same road. And the story becomes a moral argument about which path is the best to take. Well, why do people love superheroes so much? Psychologists, they often point to something called aspirational identity. Humans naturally imagine improved versions of themselves. We imagine being stronger, braver, and wiser, while superheroes, they're just the ultimate version of that idea. They represent the best version of human potential, even if they aren't technically human. I mean, Superman might be an alien, Thor may be a god, but their moral values, those are deeply human. Courage, justice, and compassion. At the same time, superheroes, they also help us deal with our fears. The modern world is complicated. Global crisis, technological change, and political conflict, it can all feel so overwhelming. Superhero stories, they simplify that complexity into a narrative structure that we can digest. There is danger, there is casualty, but there is always the chance that good will prevail, even when the world feels so chaotic. And this chaos led to the rise of the anti-hero. Over time, audiences began asking new questions. What if the heroes weren't perfect? This is where the anti-hero comes in, the characters who operate in a morally gray territory. One famous example is the Punisher, a violent but very justified war vet. Or Deadpool, a chaotic figure who constantly breaks the rules of storytelling itself, killing off vital characters and breaking the fourth wall. These characters, they reflect a more skeptical modern audience. Today, people, they distrust perfect authority figures. So heroes, they become more complex. They make mistakes, they question themselves, and they struggle. But ironically, that makes them feel even more believable. Heroes have dominated over global storytelling for decades. Some people argue that audiences may eventually grow tired of them, but the deeper idea behind superheroes is unlikely to ever disappear. Because these heroes are just the modern form of something much older. Mythology. Ancient cultures, they had mythic heroes. Medieval cultures, they had legendary knights. And modern cultures, we have the superhero. The costumes may change, the powers change, and the storytelling format changes from oral tradition to novels to comics to film. But the core idea remains the same. Because humans will constantly ask, what does it mean to be powerful? What does it mean to be good? And what would we do if we had the power to change the world? And the lives of heroes, those are simply one way of exploring those questions. So the idea of the superhero, it isn't really about flying, laser beams, or super strength. It's about possibility. The possibility that power can be used responsibly. The possibility that courage can overcome fear. And the possibility that individuals, even the flawed ones, can choose to protect others. But in that sense, the superhero, it's less of a fantasy than we might think. Because every day, ordinary people, they make the choices that echo the same moral question that these heroes face. If you had the chance to help someone, would you take it? Comic books and superheroes, they just imagine that question on the largest possible scale. But the real story behind them, it's much smaller, and it's much closer to home. Because the idea of the superhero, it ultimately asks something very simple. Not who has the most power, but who chooses to use it for good. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. So tell me, who's your favorite superhero or villain, and what's your favorite storyline from the comics? Or, if you have any other ideas for videos you want to see in the future, Drop them down below. We may just talk about it. Peace.